White House columnist for The Hill, Niall Stanage, is with us right now. Thank you for staying up late to provide some live reaction and then waking up early to be with us here on Morning in America. You know, one quote from RFK Jr. last night I thought was really nice to hear from a candidate. He said, "I don't want to alienate people. My purpose is to find values we have in common." Though that quote could be contested, you know, between his misalignment with his own party to his stance on issues like the war in Ukraine, 5G cell towers, vaccines. He's passionate, if anything. Was he presidential?
Well, I think he's appealing to a particular niche in the American population that is suspicious of orthodoxies, suspicious of those kind of party alignments that a lot of people are very rigidly tied into. Was he presidential? It's hard, honestly, for me to see that his performance really catapults him further forward against President Biden in the battle for the Democratic nomination. But it could certainly elicit more interest in him from some of those voters that Robert was mentioning who are, you know, perhaps thinking of moving outside the normal party categorizations.
You know, a theme in many of his answers was a prove me wrong kind of stance. Let's listen.
My party has lost its way, that the values that my uncle represented, my father represented when they were Democrats have been neglected, let's say. And I want to try to bring the Democratic Party back to those values.
I did ask you about this. I touched on this with you yesterday. Do you believe that a Kennedy Democrat can exist in a 2023 political environment?
So it depends what you mean by a Kennedy Democrat. I think that when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. mentioned that last night, one of the telling things was that he went on to cite things that the Democratic Party of the modern era does actually believe in. He described things like concern for the environment. He described things like a desire for racial equality, a desire for civil rights fairness. So those are things that are actually foregrounded in today's Democratic Party. Now, there is a separate argument about was the party of his father or his uncle, broadly speaking, more centrist? You could definitely make that argument, but then, you know, 1960 is a very different time from 2023.
Oh, yes. And I could talk to you about that for about an hour, but you were fact-checking for much of the night. What was maybe one of the most glaring errors you believe he made?
Well, I mean, the argument about vaccines is obviously very, very controversial. And in the clip that you played, you did hear Elizabeth Vargas pushing back whenever Kennedy was suggesting that vaccines are not safety tested. And she pointed out that there is a triple-blind placebo test done for vaccines. I think that was a key moment. There are other things that, to be fair to Mr. Kennedy, they are merely controversial views. Like, for example, on the Ukraine war, he basically believes that NATO expansionism is part of the root causes of that war. That is a contentious belief. It's not necessarily objectively false.
Yeah, and a lot of people think, as he mentioned last night, that we have spent too much money on the war in Ukraine, that we can't afford it as a nation. You know, he just has mentioned that YouTube took down another interview of his based on claims of misinformation surrounding the vaccine. And also, you know, it's the reason he was kicked off of Instagram for a couple of years, though he was just reinstated this month. Could what looks like censorship actually benefit his campaign?
It could, because there's clearly a fairly significant share of the population in this country that is suspicious of censorship. And we have seen that in all kinds of issues. I mean, not just the COVID issue, you know, the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was suppressed, and then the laptop turned out to be authentic. There are a whole range of issues where the topic of censorship and whether government or the tech industry has too much power are salient issues for Americans. Now, again, I'm not saying that's going to make him the Democratic nominee, but I think it is part of the dynamic that has powered his rise to the level of support that has surprised a lot of people, including me, to be perfectly honest.
Well, I do say, Niall Stanage, we'll have to talk about that again next time. Thank you so much.
Take care, Adrienne. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.